Lena was used to working the night shift at the small gas station on the outskirts of town. The solitude and silence had become a familiar kind of comfort. As she watched the station's surroundings through the monitors, she sipped from her thermos of coffee, preparing for another long night. But tonight felt different. There was an uneasy weight in the air, a cold dampness that clung to her skin. Outside, the darkness seemed thicker, heavier than usual. As the night dragged on, Lena moved to straighten up the store shelves. But something was off. A moment ago, she had tidied up the chips aisle. Yet now, a few bags lay torn open, scattered across the floor. She frowned, shaking her head. "Must be exhaustion," she murmured. Returning to the front desk, she checked the security cameras. But to her confusion, the footage from the aisle was missing. The recording had a gap, as if those few minutes had never existed. Trying to shake the feeling, she went to the refrigerated section. As she reached for a bottle of water, her breath caught in her throat. A word had been written in the condensation on the glass door. "Turn." Her pulse quickened. She glanced around. No one was there. The front door was locked. Reaching for her phone, she realized there was no signal. She took a deep breath and walked back to the counter. But as she checked the monitors again, she froze. There was a shadow standing outside, right in front of the gas station. It was shapeless, still, a formless void against the dim glow of the station lights. She zoomed in, but the screen flickered and suddenly went black. At the same time, the fluorescent lights inside the store flickered violently, then went out. Lena stood motionless, her breath shallow. A few seconds later, the lights buzzed back on and the monitors rebooted. Her eyes darted to the outside camera feed. There was no one there. But then she noticed something worse. Between the aisles near the front door, a pair of eyes were watching her from the shadows. The moment she blinked, they were gone. Gripping a knife from the store's counter, she forced herself to move forward. "Who's there?" she called, but her voice trembled. Silence. Then, just behind her, a whisper. "Don't see me." She spun around, heart pounding, but there was no one. The store was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that swallows sound. She needed to leave. Now rushing toward the back exit, she saw the door slightly ajar. "I locked that," she thought, her blood running cold. With shaking hands, she pushed it open, only to see something shift in the darkness beyond. But this time, there was more than one pair of eyes watching her. She slammed the door shut and sprinted back to the counter. Desperately, she tried dialing 911, but the phone was still dead. Then, from the station's speakers, a garbled radio frequency crackled to life. A distorted voice whispered, "Too late." That's when she saw it. A figure standing just outside the glass entrance. And worst of all, it looked just like her. Lena stumbled backward, gasping. She squeezed her eyes shut, whispering a desperate prayer. The lights flickered again, and when she opened her eyes, everything was normal. The monitors were back on. The outside was empty. The shelves were undisturbed. Had it all been a hallucination? She wiped the sweat from her brow, her hands still trembling. When the morning shift arrived, Lena said nothing about what had happened. She convinced herself it had been exhaustion, a trick of the mind. But deep down, she knew. The presence had been real. And the worst part? When she reviewed the security footage, she saw something impossible. The glass door reflected her own face. But behind her, another version of herself was watching. Daniel had worked as the night janitor at Oak Ridge Office Tower for years. The silence of the empty building comforted him. It was just him, the hum of vending machines, and the rhythmic swish of his mop. But tonight, as he stepped onto the 13th floor, something felt different. The air was thick, almost suffocating, and a strange metallic scent lingered. As Daniel cleaned the hallway, he noticed an office door slightly ajar, room 1306. That was strange. He always locked every door before starting his shift. Stepping inside, he found an old yellowed memo on the desk that hadn't been there before. It read, "Do not look at it." His stomach twisted. Who left this? Shrugging it off, Daniel returned to his work. But as he pushed his cleaning cart down the hall, he felt it. Eyes on him. He turned sharply. Nothing. The hallway was empty. But then he heard it, a soft scratching sound coming from behind him. Slow, deliberate. He spun around again, his pulse pounding, but the hallway remained eerily still. Deciding he was just tired, Daniel moved toward the elevator. But when the doors slid open, the fluorescent lights inside flickered wildly. And worse, his reflection wasn't his. It was slightly off. The face staring back had hollowed-out eyes, too wide, too dark. It grinned. The elevator doors slammed shut before he could react. Heart hammering, Daniel rushed for the stairwell. As he descended, the scratching sound returned. Only now it was coming from below him. Faster, more erratic. Someone, or something, was in the stairwell with him. When he reached the 8th floor, the emergency light overhead buzzed and died, plunging everything into darkness. Panicked, he flicked on his phone's flashlight. The beam cut through the dark, landing on a figure standing just a few steps below him. It was tall, gaunt, and completely still. Its face was missing, just a smooth, featureless void. And then its head twitched toward him. Daniel bolted, taking the stairs 2 at a time. He slammed through the exit door and ran into the parking lot. But as he reached his car, he noticed something horrifying. His own reflection in the car window wasn't mimicking his movements. It was watching him. Trembling, he fumbled for his keys. His reflection lifted a finger to its lips in a silent shh. Then his phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. He hesitated before looking. The message read, "Turn around." He didn't. He couldn't. Instead, he threw himself into his car, started the engine, and sped away. But as he drove, the streetlights flickered, and in the rearview mirror, he saw it. His reflection wasn't his anymore. It was smiling. Daniel quit the next morning. He told himself it had been exhaustion, a hallucination. But as he stared at his bathroom mirror, his reflection blinked. A second too late. Mia hated working the night shift at the 24-hour diner. It wasn't the long hours that bothered her. It was the people. Or worse, the empty hours when no one came in at all. On this particular night, the wind howled outside, rattling the glass windows. She wiped down the counter, counting the hours until sunrise. At 2:37 a.m., the bell above the door jingled. A man walked in, his footsteps eerily soft against the tiled floor. He wore a gray hoodie, his face mostly obscured by shadows. Mia forced a polite smile. "What can I get you?" she asked. The man didn't respond right away. Instead, he slowly turned his head toward her, as if registering her presence for the first time. "Coffee," he murmured. His voice was wrong, flat, almost robotic. Mia poured the coffee, sneaking glances at him. He didn't move. He didn't fidget. He just sat there, staring at something unseen. When she placed the cup in front of him, he lifted it slowly, but didn't drink. Instead, he whispered, "You shouldn't be here." A chill crept down Mia's spine. "Excuse me?" she asked. The man finally lifted his face, and her stomach dropped. His eyes, they were completely black. Not just the pupils, the entire eye. "It knows you're here," he continued, his voice hollow. "It doesn't like when people stay past their time." Mia took a step back. The lights flickered overhead, and the radio behind the counter crackled with static. Then, the clock on the wall stopped. Not just paused, the second hand snapped backward in jerky, unnatural motions. The diner was no longer silent. Somewhere, something was breathing. Deep, raspy, close. She spun toward the kitchen's entrance, and in the reflection of the stainless steel fridge, she saw it. A figure, impossibly tall, standing right behind her. Its head tilted at an unnatural angle, its mouth stretching too wide in a twisted grin. The man in the hoodie stood as well. "You need to leave," he whispered. Mia's instincts screamed at her to run. She bolted toward the exit, but the bell above the door never rang, because the door wouldn't open. It was as if the diner itself had sealed her in. The lights went out completely. A voice, deep and inhuman, spoke directly into her ear. "You stayed too long." The air around her shifted. Shadows moved where there shouldn't have been any. And then, something cold brushed against her arm. She screamed. Suddenly, the bell jingled again. Light flooded back in. The diner was empty. The man was gone. The coffee cup sat on the counter, untouched. Shaking, Mia grabbed her phone. 2:37 a.m., exactly when the man had walked in. The clock had never moved forward. She turned toward the fridge, her breath catching. Her reflection was still staring at her, half a second too late. She quit that night, refusing to stay past midnight ever again. But every now and then, she'd check the diner's security footage from that night. And every time, the same thing happened. The video cut out for exactly 1 minute and came back to an empty diner. But in the reflection of the window, something else was still inside.